Okay, so good morning everyone and welcome to the Microsoft Teams Quick Start session. So we've run a few of these now over the last, particularly the last 3 or 4 months since lockdown. Originally, the idea was to help our existing customers to adopt Teams quickly, as everybody suddenly got moved to working from home overnight, it seemed at the time. But we've widened it out really and just sent these invites out, and we run these sessions. We were running them twice a week at one point. We're running them every couple of weeks now, depending on demand. But yeah, welcome anyway. So this isn't about Risc, this is about Teams, but just this slide just gives you a useful overview of who we are and I guess why we're here talking about Teams. So Risc have been around. It's actually our 20th year this year, and we're focused on cloud services. So as you can see with the Microsoft partner logo in the top, we are a strong partner of Microsoft's, particularly around Office 365 and obviously Teams as a big part of that. We also partner with another couple of companies, which I'll mention a little bit more as we go through. We've got some follow-on events that might be of interest to you in conjunction with WaveNet, who are a partner we work with that provides us with the telephony and contact center capability in particular around Teams, and also a company called Redstore that we work with for most of those 20 years that provide effectively business continuity, backup and recovery services for Teams, Office 365 and traditional cloud services. But yeah, certainly with Teams is a big focus for us. So what I'm going to try and cover today is pretty much what we used to cover in around half a day's training, crunched down into an hour. So I'll talk very quickly and go through it quite fast, so bear with me. But we're going to try and cover what we see as 80% of what you need to know in effectively 20% of the time, hence the Quick Start name. So what we're going to cover is Teams itself, what it is, the concepts around working in Teams and channels, how Teams uses other parts of Office 365 to deliver its functionality, so things like SharePoint, and we'll get some of the concepts out of the way early on around guest and external user access. I'll walk through on the demo side how to set up a team, create a channel, add people to that channel, and manage the content of those channels, and look at posts and messages and how to upload and synchronize and find files. In the second half, we'll go more into the sort of interactive side of Teams, so around the chats, calls, and meeting experience within Teams, and also look at things like the activity feed and how you can use that to help manage your time through Teams. And then hopefully, if we've got time at the end, then we'll just look at some of the futures. As always with Microsoft, Teams is a constantly evolving product. It seems to be evolving on a weekly basis at the moment, but there are some things coming down the line that that may be of interest to you. So we'll try and cover those off. Okay, so Teams is everywhere. So these two slides seem like a long time ago now. The one on the left was actually when the last time I was in London, so that was sort of end of February, just before all of this lockdown kicked in. And even at the time, Microsoft were pushing Teams incredibly hard in terms of advertising and PR. There were even adverts on TV during the Six Nations, which is something Microsoft don't normally do, but just gives you an idea about how, excuse me, how important, how strategic they saw Teams at the time, and obviously still see that Teams is as part of Office 365, and just raising awareness and helping people to understand what Teams can deliver. And there are a number of reasons why Microsoft have put so much effort behind marketing and developing Teams, particularly over the last 6 months, and we'll talk about that in a little while. In terms of in the press, and you see these screenshots, this one was back in March, and Microsoft saw some crazy growth numbers, particularly as the lockdown moved from China, which is in China they saw something like a 500% increase in usage of Teams over the space of a week, and obviously as that lockdown moved into Europe, we saw a similar pattern. And the number that they talk about now is 75 million daily active users, and it leapt to 75 million in the space of a couple of weeks. Again, something like 70% growth. Then that was during April. And then people started asking questions around, okay, now with the lockdown, people getting used to working from home, will we ever go back to the office? And I think, again, we don't have the definitive answer for that. I think for most organisations, ourselves included, we'll probably end up with a mixture of people office-based, people remote working, and I think for most people, a combination of the two seems to be the right approach. Then you've got organisations like Fujitsu in July announced that they were offering all of their 80,000 workers the option to be home-based, which was quite innovative for most big organisations. So certainly, COVID has driven a massive change. It's accelerated what Microsoft saw or predicted that was going to happen over the next 2 years. Effectively happened in 2 months in terms of digital transformation and flexible working. So that's the environment, and obviously Teams is not the only solution that can help your people to work remotely and flexibly, but it's one of the main ones. And we get asked the question all the time, well, why Teams? And this is an example of a Zoom call. I think it was the cabinet, one of the early COVID calls. Zoom does great. It's great for video meetings. Likewise, WebEx. A lot of our customers, used WebEx and still do use WebEx. And I think the difference really between Teams and those other products is it's much more than just a video conference solution or a meeting solution. It's a platform, it's a collaboration tool, and I think importantly for most of you, and I've made the assumption that most, if not all of you, are currently using Office 365. It's part of Office 365, so the same identity, the same security wrap, single sign-on into Office 365 obviously also gives you access to Teams. So it's not a separate platform. It uses much of what Office 365 uses in the background. So if you look at this diagram here, this just shows you how some of the other services interact with Teams. And I think, again, the question we asked is, why Teams? Why do I need another product for my people to learn and understand? And I think if Microsoft have their way, and if you look at the direction that Microsoft are trying to take Teams will become the place or the only place that you go to get work done and collaborate with people within your organization and also people outside of your organization. So if you look at some of the, on the right hand side, some of the legacy services like Skype for Business and the messaging and chat function of that's all now built into Teams, as you'd expect. SharePoint itself sits behind Teams, so Teams doesn't have its own file storage and file sharing platform. It uses SharePoint to store those files and manage the permissions to those files. Currently, you can manage your calendar in Teams in the same way that you can with Outlook at the moment, or currently your inbox, your email isn't built into Teams, but that's coming. That's something else that's coming in the pipeline. And if you use Yammer, that's an enterprise social network product for those of you that don't use it with Office 365. That is being integrated as effectively an app that sits in Teams rather than a standalone platform. And things like the ability to be able to co-author documents, to work on documents together with people within your organization, and now with Teams, actually people outside of your organization, that's already there in Office 365. Teams just takes advantage of that and delivers a portal, a single place for you to get work done. So that's sort of the current work environment and Teams itself. Just a couple of concepts I wanted to cover before we launch into the demo. So, and this may well be stating the obvious for those of you that are already using Teams, but you've got 3 levels. You've got your organization, you've got your teams, and then you've got your channels within a team. And the teams are collections of people that have to work on work on documents, work on projects together. So a team could be a department, it could be a geographical team, it could be for example, we have a team that's just dedicated to customer projects, and each of the channels is a particular customer. We have teams that are particular vendors that we work with, like Microsoft, and then each channel within there is a particular technical discipline or product. So really depends how your organization works in how you set up these teams, and we work with a lot of organizations to help them to define what that looks like. And as it says there, channels are dedicated sections where the conversations take place, and we'll see that as we go through the demo again. And as I said before, files are stored behind Teams within SharePoint. The other concept that's worth getting out of the way early on is guest access versus external access. So Teams gives you the ability to add people from outside of your organization into a team, so you can actually collaborate together, both in terms of conversations that happen in the channel, but also to share documents and work on documents together. Those guest users don't have to be Teams users. They can be standalone. They can be personal users, as long as they've got an email address that can be authenticated, like Hotmail, like Gmail, then they can be added in if that's what you choose to allow in your organization. So effectively, they become part of your organization as a guest, as opposed to external users, which in the old Skype for Business terminology is what we call federation. So that allows you and your users to communicate with people outside of your organization with a different domain. And again, we'll see that as we go through the demo. Hopefully it'll make a lot more sense when you see it in action. But they are two very different concepts, but they're both delivered as part of Teams. So external access allows you to see people's status, allows you to chat with them, allows you to call them with a Teams to Teams call, and also allows you to have a video conversation with them as well. Okay, so that's enough. That's enough with the slides. We'll just flick over to demo mode now. So just bear with me a second while I make this full screen. Two seconds. So let me just get rid of that message. There we go. Sorry, that is the window I was looking for. There it is. Okay, so that's my Teams environment. Obviously, you'll recognize the layout if you're already using Teams. So I've got two users here. I've got myself here, which is Mark, as a demo user. I've also got another user who's using web access. So this is, if I bring him over here, so this is Andy, who's also part of the team here. So as I go through the demo, I'll show you how the conversations go between the two people. So this is just using Teams web access in the other window. So a couple of things that are worth showing you before we dive into it. So your status, this is automatically set here. So obviously it knows that I'm in a meeting and I'm also presenting. So it sets me to what's called presenting, which is a do not disturb status. So this will suppress any messages or any calls that come through while I'm presenting, which is quite useful. You can manually override these statuses. Generally, for most people, you just let Teams manage it for you. So if you're in a meeting, if you're busy in your calendar, it will change your status to busy. If you walk away from your keyboard for 5 or 10 minutes, it will automatically set your status to be away, and will actually tell the people how long you've been away for. So most of this is automatic, but as I say, you can override it and change that manually if you so wish. The other really useful piece in here is this search bar, if you've not used it before. So this is effectively the Google search or the Bing search, whichever way you want to look at it, for Teams. So you can look for people, you can look for words in a document. So for example, let's just pick Microsoft. Oops, sorry. Let me just unpin that out so you can see that out of the way. Try again. So it'll pull up, for example, any team containing the name Microsoft, any meetings that you had that contain the name Microsoft. If I press enter here, you'll see on the left-hand side, it'll pick up and search any messages. There won't be any people with the name Microsoft, I don't think, no. But also we'll search any file. So basically any file that's been uploaded into Teams has been uploaded into a chat conversation that you're party to, then you can search that. And that's the beauty of putting those documents into Teams rather than in what we call traditional SharePoint document library. Let me just see if I can unpin this toolbar. Okay, so that's the layout. So I'm going to dive straight into what the teams look like. So there are 3 different types of teams that you can actually set up, and I've got one of each here just to show you what that looks like. So our all company team, and we would recommend as an organization you have at least one of these. This basically, if you can see that on the top right, is an organizational wide team. So when you create one of these, everybody automatically becomes a member, so you don't have to think about or worry about adding and removing people from a team. It automatically invites everybody that's part of your organization into that team. So that's really useful for organizational wide messages, broadcast messages, updates. So always recommend have at least one of those. The other type here, this is the all welcome one here. If you look on the top right hand side, It's got the title org, so basically that means it's accessible to anybody. So again, you don't have to specifically invite people in, they can actually add themselves in. So that's quite useful as well for non-sensitive content. And then the one below here, which we're using for this session here, the Teams end user training team. If I click on there, you'll see it's got a title of team. So that is the most common type. So that's where you control as an owner who has access to that content. So if I just flick to my other user, Andy, for a second, let me just go to Teams. You'll see he's only a member of the all company, but there are a couple of ways that he can join an existing team. So if I click down here where it says join or create a team, then it'll pop up there to say, actually, there's a team available here that's open to anybody. You can join that if you want. So click there simply, and then that team, he's joined that team now, and it's added into the files on the left hand side. The other option is to join a team with a code. So although this team here, if I go down to the Teams end user training and go to Teams end user training here, go to manage team, go to settings, and then you'll see there's a team code here, which is a unique identity for that team. So rather than having to go through, if you've got hundreds of people in your organization, you might not want to have to go through individually and add people into the team. You can send them a code. So this code here is, if I just paste that one there and go back to Andy, you can see I can join team with the code there. So we'll just paste that code into there, join team, and then it'll pop up on the left hand side. So he's now a member of that team as well. So that's how you can invite people to Teams. If I just go back to show you how that team is managed there. So if you create a team, and again, this, there are questions around as an organization, do you allow anybody to create a team and then add members to it? That's great from a productivity point of view, having people to self-serve, but obviously you can end up with potentially hundreds of teams with not many people in. So you may want to bring some central control into that ability to create teams. But if you're an owner of that team, effectively you can add and remove anybody that you like. So here now we can see we've got some members. So members are people within your organization that you've added into that team. Guests, as you see, we've got a few guest users here. These are people that are outside of your organization that you've added into that team. One of the recommendations we'd make is to have at least 2 owners for every team. Obviously, if I'm away and we need to make changes, then you need to have somebody else that's got that ability, so you can promote somebody internal to be an owner. So I'm going to promote Andy there as an owner. And then there's also ways of adding people here. So if you want to add an internal member here, it will give you a list of people internally that aren't currently members of that team there. So I can add Sean's demo account onto there. I can either make him a member or an owner, close, and then he's added into there as well. There he is, Sean Sargent and demo. So you can control as the owner absolutely who's part of that team. As you can see there, the guest users are people outside of your organization, but effectively they have pretty much the same level of access. And again, this is something you may want to control centrally, and there are ways of doing that. But by default, it's an on or off. So from an IT admin level, you can say, yes, I want guest access allowed, or no, I don't. There are other ways of making it a bit more granular. So one of the ways that we work with customers is to create a Teams owners group. So maybe anybody that's an IT admin and anybody that's a head of departments, you allow people to create teams, and then you get a little bit more control over it. But that's something probably a little bit further down the line. When I say that guests have got exactly the same access, they don't have exactly the same level of access. So if you look at the default permissions here, so by default, members can do things like create new channels. They can also create private channels, which I'll show you how that's done in a second. And all of these are defaults. Obviously, if you look at the guests there, by default, guests aren't allowed to create, update, and delete channels sensibly. And I think generally we would recommend that for most organizations, leave these as they are as the default permissions. They work well. Obviously, you've got control over who the members and who the guests are. So, leave the permissions as they are. So that's enough about that. I'm just going to show now how we add a channel into that team. So if I click here, click add channel, I'm going to create a new channel and I can call it Teams Quick Start, and then today's date, which is the 25th. And that's all you need to put in to create a channel. So there are options down here. So by default, it's a standard channel. What that means is that anybody that's a member of the team at that level inherits the right to access the channel. There are options to create what they call private channels. So I will create one in a second to show you what that looks like and how that looks different. And then you can actually say, make this appear in everybody's channel list that's a member of that team. We're going to create that channel. There we go. And there it is on the left-hand side. And by default, it creates 3 tabs, and I'll go through those in a little bit more detail, but you get effectively post, which is where the conversations happen, files, which is where you can see what files are stored within that channel, and wiki, which is effectively a notes page to keep information related to that channel. Just while I'm there, I'll also create a private channel for that one as well, just to show you how that looks different. So we know which one it is. If I click this down here, make that a private channel, then you get another set of options here, which is basically asking you who you want access to that private channel. So that's really useful if you've got, for example, you might want to invite everybody to the all company team, but actually you might want a channel in there just for heads of departments or finance, where you only have a subset of people in there. So obviously the people need to be a member of the team before we can invite them to the channel. So let me pick on Andy again. There he is. Let me pick on Sean. There he is. And let me pick on Matt. Okay. So again, what that's done is created a private channel that only those people are members of. So if we go into, manage that channel, you can see there that it's only got 3 members, as well as you as an owner. Whereas obviously this one here, you inherit all of the people that are members of that team above. So I'm going to show you very quickly what it looks like to post first message. I can't actually spell. So here is the training script. Please find training attached. So if you want to notify people, there are 3 levels of which you can notify them. So you can notify them individually. So again, if they're part of that channel and part of that team, you can notify them by at mentioning them there. If you don't want to do that individually, you just want to let everybody know that's in that channel. There we go. That's the channel. And then at the highest level, you can actually notify everybody that's a member of that team as well. There you go. Obviously, you wouldn't normally do all 3. You'd do one or the other, but just to show you what that looks like, you can actually notify people so they'll get an alert. By default, you won't get alerted every time somebody posts something into a channel. Otherwise, you can get swamped. But again, I'll show you what that looks like. So the other thing we're going to do is attach a file to that. There we go. You can either pick a file that's already uploaded in Teams. You can pick a file from your personal OneDrive or any third-party drive service that you've added in. So for this one, I've added in Google Drive, for example. For today, I'm just going to show what it looks like adding one from existing computer. So I'm going to add the scripts in here. Just give me a second. There we go. There we go. Teams training script. Okay, so just give that a few seconds to upload. The other option you've got here, if you notice at the top, you've got this post into multiple channels. So if you've got a message that you want to post into multiple parts of the business. So for example, again, any channel that you've got access to, you might want to pop it into there as well. Well, for the purposes of today, I will just share that and press send. So there's a few things that's done now. So obviously that's the first post that's in there. So obviously it's alerted Andy for a start. So if I nip back to Andy's, you'll see he's got some new activities in Teams. He's got a new activity in his activity feed. So it's telling him that I mentioned him. Also tells him previously that I added him to a private channel, which is something else that you get mentioned for. What it's also done, if we click into files here, you'll see that it's actually added that attached file into the file store under that channel. Now, you don't have to attach a file to a message every time to get them into Teams. So if you've got some other documents that you want to upload into there, you can literally click the upload button there, click files. Again, we're going to desktop. Let's pick some of these other files. So let's pick the sales forecast. Let's pick 100 ways to get healthy document and click open. So what it'll do is go away, as you can see there on the right hand side, and upload those into the Teams Quickstart. So you don't need to do a separate post every time you want to upload files. So those 3 files are now there. As I mentioned before, they're actually sitting in SharePoint. So whether you look at these files through Teams, whether you actually look at them through SharePoint, if I click here, it will let me open it in SharePoint. There you go. So again, that's the same 3 files, but in a slightly different view. So for those of you that are familiar with SharePoint, you'll see effectively, if you look at the URL at the top, it's got Risc IT Demo, which is our company name, .sharepoint.com, sites, which means it's under a team site, and then the team site name, which is end user training. So that all of that's created automatically for you when you create the team. You don't need to worry about that. But what you can do here is sync locally. So if you want to keep those files stored locally on your PC, you can click the sync button here. Likewise, you can sync from here as well in SharePoint. The beauty of doing it in the SharePoint view is actually you can sync the whole lot. So all of the channels that are under Teams end user training. If I click documents here, you'll see all of the ones that we've done previously. As you can see, there are a lot of them. Let me just put that newer to older. So you see the one we've created, the directory we've created this morning, which is 25th of August. Go into there, and obviously there are those 3 files that we created earlier. So just to show you, I'll just sync that locally. Just a second. It will go away and do that in a second. So it's giving it a nudge. Doesn't like that. Let me just try doing it from here. There we go. That's better. So what that's doing is that's using the OneDrive client on your PC actually to sync that library down onto OneDrive. So if I look in here now, go into Teams End User Training, if I just drag that screen across, you'll see now I've got the directory locally here, and I've got the 3 documents stored locally on my PC. And again, if I drop some documents into there, it'll sync them back up to SharePoint and Teams. If I just, for example, grab some pictures, welcome to North Wales, some pictures of Snowdon here and Conway Castle. If I just copy those and pop them into the directory here. Okay, so we've now got all those pictures in there. If I go back to the SharePoint view here, if I just refresh it, okay, you'll see now that those files are also uploaded into the SharePoint view. If I go back to Teams, and again, I'll need to refresh it so I can get a view. Go back into files. Again, you see that the 5 pictures are in there as well. So back to my original point, those files are stored in SharePoint. Whether you're looking at them through Teams, whether you're looking at them through SharePoint, or whether you're looking at them locally through File Manager, then they are the same. They are the same files. And what this means is, and again, for those of you that are already using Office 365 in Anger and using document collaboration, you'll know this already, but you can work on a document with multiple people. So once it's in a shared space, whether that's Teams, SharePoint, or OneDrive for Business, you can collaborate on that document with multiple people. Teams has its own document editing. So if I just click the 3 dots here, you'll see I can either open it directly in Teams, I can open it in the full-blown Word app if I want, or I can open it in a web app version. Again, for today, I'll just open that in Teams and show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to open this document here. So this is the training script for today, and I'm going to do the same for Andy. So I'm going to flick into here, go into files, and I'm going to do the same, Andy's view, and edit the document there. So you'll see a couple of things that you may not see normally when you're editing Word documents. So just give that a minute to catch up with itself. So here, this very tiny icon that I'm hovering over now, tells me that somebody else is editing the document, and there's no limit to how many people can edit these documents at the same time. So it's telling Andy that Mark is in that document, and actually tells him whereabouts he is. So if I just go down as Andy and start to make some edits down here, if I flick back to Mark's view, you'll see that Andy's in the document and he's actually on page 3, and I can go straight to that location. So there we go. And you can see there that Andy's editing the document. So obviously Microsoft have built things like version control. So if you're using the full-blown desktop app, you can roll back to any version, any previous version of the document. So gone are the days that you need multiple versions of the document saved separately. It's in one place, it's in a shared area, and you can work on those documents together. So that's document collaboration, that's uploading documents. As I mentioned, there's a few things that happened in that post. So I notified, there we go. So I notified Andy, I notified the channel, and I notified the team, and you can control that. So again, the default behavior, if you look at channel notifications here, as a user, I won't get notified every time somebody posts something in the channel. If it's really important to you, you can change that. So you can say, yes, I want banner and feed. So the banner is the bit that pops up from the bottom of the screen telling you've got a new message. Obviously the feed is your activity feed, which we'll look at in a second. And do you want to include all replies? And again, if you're mentioned, do you want to be notified about that? Well, generally, yes, you do. So again, the standard configuration is that all new posts are off and banner and feeds are not, but you can obviously change that depending on your particular requirement. So now if Andy posts something new into that team, regardless of whether he mentions me or not, I'll get notified. So if I go back to the team here and pick the post, I'll reply to that. Thanks for. Okay, so if we go back to my notification, give it a chance to catch up, it will let me know that Andy's posted in that channel. Just very quickly, while that's updating, I'll just go into the private channels and just show you again the difference here. It doesn't have an automatic tab here for Wiki for whatever reason. That's just the way it's set up. And again, the posts are just between those, well, in this case, 4 people that are members. You can add guests into this, so it's not limited to internal users only. So you can still create a private channel with guests. They don't have to be internal users, but obviously that's a great benefit if you want to keep some of that information between a subset of the overall team without having to create a separate team. No, it hasn't notified me there. Let me just posting in there. That's better. Okay, so now it's telling me in my activity feed that Andrew's posted in that channel. So it does work there from that point of view. So that's the basics of Teams. The other piece I wanted to talk to you about here was the tabs across the top. So if you look here, obviously you've got 3 tabs as default. You can add as many as you like on there. So again, if you've got something that's important that you want to pin to the top of that tab, of that channel rather, then you can add it here. So for example, if you want that document pinned to the top, you can select from a number of apps that are here. So obviously most of these are Microsoft Office 365 apps. There are some third-party apps that I've added in there. So things like, as you see there, Cisco WebEx, Trello, which is a third-party project management tool. So I'll just show you very quickly what that looks like. So if I want to tab that at the top, so I'll put the training scripts at the top. There you go. So it creates a new tab at the top that I can then rename to something a bit more relevant. Okay, so that's always there now. And again, if you look at Andy's view, it's telling him that I've added a new tab at the top and here's the link to it. So it lets you know what's going on all the time. So there you go. You can also add tabs for, as I mentioned, third-party products. So if you've got, for example, you use Trello to manage your projects, then you may want to post the Trello tab to the top. It's telling me I'm already logged in. Here are all the boards that are within Trello. Just click on Voice Project, save that. Okay, again, it's created a tab at the top with what's effectively a Trello board on there. So there's quite a lot of third-party apps that you can add in there. If you go into these three dots here on the left-hand side and go to More Apps, you'll see there's a whole library and whole database. And again, this is a lot of organizations realize that the amount of effort and momentum Microsoft have got with Teams, they want to make sure that their app is part of Teams, so you don't have to leave the actual Teams app itself to get work done. So if you look on here, for example, we've got WebEx on the left-hand side, so you can interact with the WebEx bot and create meetings and set meetings up that way. Likewise in Zoom, very similar. You can actually start Zoom meetings from the bot without having to leave Teams. So Microsoft see Teams as the place, the one place you'll go to get work done. Likewise, I think most organizations are thinking the same and want to make sure that their app is part of that ecosystem. So I mentioned the activity feed just very quickly. You can actually filter this. So this will just show you what kind of notifications you get in the activity feed. So unread messages, where you've been mentioned, missed calls. So whether you're using just Teams to team calls, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second, or whether you're using Teams as your telephony, then obviously you can have missed calls, voicemail, for example. So here, then we've got missed call, whole list of all of your missed calls. Then you've got a list of voicemails, and I'll cover voicemails off in a second, but it will do things like store the voicemail and transcribe it for you within Teams. Again, whether that's just a Teams to Teams call or whether that's an actual phone number calling in, depending on whether you've got business voice or not. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in terms of Teams and channels and posts, synchronizing files. So we'll move on now to the more sort of interactive side of Teams and start with chat. So chat's probably the number one place you go to communicate with people within your organization and people outside your organization. So that pinning at the top there just reminded me just one final thing before I move on from the team side, actually in organizing your teams. So you can actually drag and drop and move these teams around. So if you want the end user training team at the top, for example, you can do that. You can hide teams, hide channels, and you can hide teams. So if I pick Wales Tech Week and I can unpin that from the top for a start, and then I can hide it. So it puts it out of the way in this hidden channels list here, which we've got 32, obviously. So in terms of, as your team's world gets bigger, then you may need to organize it and actually just so you can focus on those that are important to you. So pinning them to the top is really useful. So click those three dots there, pin the channel to the top, and then it'll appear at the top there. And obviously you can unpin them as well. You can hide the team itself. So if it's a team that it's not particularly active, that you don't want cluttering up your work, then you can just click the three dots there, hide it, and then it pops it down into this hidden teams list here, which we've got loads. So just to try and keep it sort of clean and easy to access. Likewise with chats, you can pin important chats. So what it will do is Teams uses something called persistent chat. So depending on your information retention policy, by default, Teams will keep everything. So every conversation you've had back to, if you look here, scroll down, back to when we first started doing this, so February time, you can see all of the chat conversations are there. Obviously, because we've got the chat window open in the current Teams meeting, actually you can see that there. So it pins all of these chats here, and you can obviously search through all of your previous chats. The quickest way to start a chat, just click the little button here with the pen on that says new chat and start typing. So you pick somebody within your organization. So I'm going to pick Andy O, and what it will do is pull up your previous chat history. So obviously Andy and I have had lots of chat conversations, so you can again go back through that chat history unless you specifically delete it. You can add multiple people into here, and again Teams knows that we've had a three-way conversation before. That is the way that we're going to have a chat conversation. As soon as you start that conversation again, I'd actually named this team, and you can change the name of the team just again to help you organize your team's life. You can actually put the name on here. Once you start the conversation, then obviously you can escalate that chat conversation to an audio call then on the top right, to a video call, or you can do screen sharing, or you can do both. You can also add people to the conversation. So again, click that there, view and add participants. So you can add somebody else from your organization. So for example, we'll pick on Bruce here, and you get the option to let Bruce see all of the previous chat history, only part of it, or none of the chat history. And again, you can just add Bruce in there. So you've now got a four-way conversation. You could actually chat up to, I think, 250 users. Obviously, that makes it a little bit unwieldy to manage, but you could, in theory, do that. Something that's fairly new as well, this little icon here, either here where it says pop out chat, or you can actually do it here as well. You can actually pop that chat window out separately, so you can have multiple chat windows going at the same time. One thing to bear in mind if you're chatting with external people from an external organization. So if Microsoft have changed this recently in the latest updates. You used to have chat and contact side by side. Now it's a drop down for some reason. Just to be mindful of that. So this is my contact list that I've created. So you'll see we've got a mixture of external and internal people. So here are the internal guys. If I hover over Andy, I can see that he was active 5 minutes ago. This is his phone number, email address. I can message him, call him, video conference with him. As you can see, we've got some external people here. Got some customers. We've got some people from the Risc main business, and then we've got some other third parties. For example, Zoe's from Microsoft. She's our account manager. So I can see that she's busy. You don't get quite the same level of granularity with external users. You won't see how long they've been offline, for example. You'll just see whether they're available, busy, do not disturb, or away. But you can actually, obviously the beauty of that is I can see whether Kerry's busy before I start a conversation rather than after I start a conversation. And pretty much you can do exactly the same as you would do with any internal conversation. So I'm going to pick on Matt. You can actually, because he's using Teams, although he's an external user, you can call him, you can video conference with him. What you can't do, if you notice subtly there, is you can't add other people into the conversation. And this is a limitation of Teams at the moment, is external conversations can only be one-to-one, which is, again, a limitation that Microsoft are going to resolve at some point soon, we hope. But internal conversations can be as many people as you like, up to about 250. External can only be one-to-one. So again, that's contacts, previous chat history. Like I say, if I click on here, this is the conversation. As Sean says, feel free to ask any questions in the chat if you want as you go through. And then again, all of the chat history is there for you. You can pin that chat conversation, pin there again, so it'll stay at the top. As you can imagine, you can end up with hundreds of conversations. And again, one of the questions that customers ask us is, when would we use chat versus when would we post into a channel, into a conversation in a channel? And I think generally chats are conversational, channels are informational, if that makes sense. So I think if you just want to organize a meeting, get an update from the team, that kind of thing, then chat is great for that. And internally we have chat groups running all of the time, generally by department. So we'll have a sales chat running, especially with people working from home now, not in the office. You can't see and talk to people instantly anymore. Then chat's a great way of keeping that information flow going. But if you've got something, let's say a link to a website or a document that you think would be useful to a wider audience and something that might be useful going forward, then post that into a channel, definitely. But yeah, chat is really, really useful from that point of view. Calls is actually very similar. So if you look in the chat contact list, this contact list actually is exactly the same as the one that you see in calls. So although in calls you can't sort it by department or heading, in that contact list you just see it as it is. What you can do though is set these speed dials up, and this does give it you in the same order. So you'll see here you've got customers in the same way that you had customers in chat. You've got Risc IT, you've got others, and you've got some suggested contacts, but also you have a couple of extra ones in the calls tab. One's called delegates. So you can set delegates, so people that you want to be able to answer the phone for you if you're on a call, if you're in a call. As you can see there, Sean, because he's on this call, he's actually in a call, so it tells me his status. We also have this these tabs here called speed dial. So you can set these, and if you've actually got a Teams handset, so a Teams phone, then it'll actually synchronize those speed dial users with your Teams phone, so you've got instant access to them. The other thing you'll see that we've got here that you might not have in Teams, depending on what you've got set up, is obviously I've got a dial pad here. So this is because we've got something called business voice. So effectively you can, and we've got a number of customers that we've worked with, and we've got case studies for that actually use Teams for their telephony platform. So they've moved from traditional phone system, traditional handsets on the desk, to using Teams. So here I've got obviously my telephone number, so people can call in and call me. I won't do that on this one because otherwise it will cut you all off. But when we flick to Andy, you can see actually how you can make and receive calls using Teams. You've got your call history, and then as I mentioned before, you've got voicemail, and you can set that here. So if I click my little icon at the top, go to settings, go to calls, you can see here, this is, you can define how you want calls handled. So generally, calls ring you. If they're not answered, they go to voicemail after 20 seconds. That's the default, and that works fine for most people. You might want to, if you've got a manager secretary type environment, you might want to set delegates, so you can actually define who your delegates are there. Because we've got enterprise voice, we can actually say, okay, also call my mobile number at the same time here, and it'll do that. Generally, we don't recommend people to forward calls to their mobile from Teams. What we would recommend is that you put the Teams app on your phone, because it works much better than just having the calls diverted to your phone. You keep all of that functionality you have in Teams about being able to transfer calls and create group calls, things like that. So that standard setting is fine generally. Likewise, devices, and I'm sure you've looked at this before. So this is where you set what your microphone is, what your audio device is, what your video camera is, and you can use that to make a test call to make sure it all sounds fine. So those are the most often used parts of that. So if I just flick to Andy for a second and go to his calls tab again, I'll just show you what an incoming call looks like. If I just dial his number direct, just give me a second. So again, he's got enterprise voice, so he's got the dial pad on there, as you can see. I'm just going to dial in from my mobile. 2105 6755. Okay, so you'll see it pop up on the screen. He says optimistically. Okay. So you can see Teams is telling you that there's a call coming in. It tells you that it's coming in from a phone number. So you've got a couple of options. You can answer it or you can decline it. Obviously, if I decline it, it'll go to voicemail. If I answer it, let me just make sure that's muted, otherwise you'll get lots of feedback. So that's answered the call there. You'll see on the left-hand side, that's the number it's come in from. You've got a couple of options. You can actually add somebody else internally into this call, because it's a phone number rather than a Teams call. You can add as many people into this call as you like. So you could add another mobile conversation. You could add somebody else internally, for example. I'm not going to do that because Bruce isn't online. I know he won't answer, but it will effectively go off and add them into the call. Or I can add another phone number into that and make it a three-way conversation. So now you can see it's calling out to another number. Assuming I've got the signal here, it will actually answer it. Sorry, there you go. Okay, it's actually ringing. Okay, so now we have a three-way call. So very straightforward. So that's what a normal phone number looks like. So now we've got a three-way conversation. You can put them on hold. You can add other people into the meeting, or you can end the meeting. So I'm just going to shut that down and then just show you what a Teams call looks like and how that's different. So again, if I go to Andy's Teams here, I'm having a Teams conversation with him. I'm just going to call him directly from Teams now, from the chat. Let's just call him. Okay, So again, you can see that's slightly different. So that's a Teams to Teams call. You'll see it's got somebody's name, so it knows who it is. Got another couple of options. Because it's a Teams call, you can answer it straight away with video, or you can answer it with a phone, or you can decline it again. So if I'm just going to answer that call, just let me mute that. There, thank you. Again, that's a Teams to Teams call. You've got some extra options here, so you can do things like share your screen, obviously because it's a Teams call. But you cannot add anybody else to that call because it's an external Teams call. As I mentioned, that's one-to-one only. What you can do is consult and transfer. So if somebody calls in, ask for somebody else in the organization, you can just click the consult and transfer. You can have a chat conversation with somebody else within the business and then just put that call straight through. Obviously, it puts it on hold at the moment. So effectively, and we do this all the time, you can actually replace your traditional phone system completely with Teams now and bring your numbers across. So that's calls and enterprise voice, just very, very quickly. Sean, I saw there's a question on the chat. Do you want to cover that at the end, or shall I try and answer it now?
It was just about syncing. Francis asked, can you show the folder syncing again?
Okay, I'll come back to that, no problem. Let me just finish off this the scripted bit, and then we'll come back to that in the Q&A if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So that's calls, taking calls, receiving calls, transferring calls. Again, there's another session that we run alongside WaveNet where we go into this in a lot more detail, which I'll cover off at the end, some of the other events. So this is just touching really, really quickly on voice and calls. Obviously, you don't need enterprise voice to be able to make Teams to Teams calls, either within your organization or to external Teams users, but you do have to have enterprise voice to be able to have a phone number like that. So finally, the calendar. As I mentioned, calendars synced between Teams and Outlook effectively. You can create meetings from here and they'll be synced into your Outlook calendar and vice versa. The advantage of creating meetings in here is you don't have to think about making them a Teams meeting. So for example, here, and if I create new meeting here, call it test number 1. Let's put it back to this afternoon so it doesn't interfere. Let's pop it in there. So you can invite anybody to a meeting. They don't have to have Teams. They don't have to be part of your organization. Obviously, they can be anybody. They can be outside of your organization, external users. There we go. Obviously, by default, when you create a meeting using Teams, it will populate it with all of the Teams detail. The other thing you can do that you can't do through Outlook is actually post that meeting directly into a channel. So again, if you've got a team, a channel with lots of members, and you don't want to actually have to invite people individually to this meeting, you can just post it in the channel and say, this meeting's taking place, please join. So if I just pick the team that the channel we just created, I'll find it somewhere. As I mentioned, we've had quite a few of these events. There we go, 25th of August. And create that meeting. Obviously, it goes off and does its stuff in the calendar. As I mentioned, it will also, if you look in the channel, you'll see that it's updated the channel to say that I've scheduled a meeting for today at 2 o'clock. So anybody that's in that channel, for example, Andy, will also have that notification that is to say that I've scheduled a meeting, so he can just join. So you don't need to add them individually to the channel. If I show you what that looks like in Outlook, let me just drag the Outlook window across. So again, this is the one that we just created here. If I open it in Outlook, you'll see that it's pre-populated it with the Teams invite link, and for us, because we've got audio conferencing, the dial-in details if people want to dial in. So it doesn't really matter whether you create it in Teams or you create it in Outlook. Obviously, if you create it in Outlook, if I'll create another one here at 1 o'clock, new meeting request, test number 2, just to be imaginative, and I'm going to invite Andy to that one. Obviously, for here you have to make a conscious decision to make it a Teams meeting. So you just click the little button here, and then it will do the same and pre-populate that meeting with the Teams details. There we go. And when it's had a couple of seconds to sync up, you'll see that that will appear in the calendar in a minute when it's synced itself up. So I think Teams meetings are probably one of the most powerful tools that you can use in Teams. Hang on a second, let me just refresh that. There it is. So let's come back there. And again, looks exactly the same, although it's been created in Outlook. The other option, which you may or may not have, depending on which licenses you use. So if you've got enterprise licenses in 365, then you also get this option here. If you click the drop down, you can create what's called a live event. Again, we're not going to go into massive detail on this today, just because of time, but that is, if you've got an event where you want to effectively broadcast to a lot of users and have much more control over it. So obviously today we're using standard Teams meetings, which means you can take yourselves off mute, chat, sort of talk, and then post in the chat, and it's interactive. With a live event, it's delayed and you can only communicate through a Q&A forum. So it's great for big broadcast events, and you can have multiple presenters and you can control it and schedule them. But that's only available through enterprise licenses, not business licenses. So you may not have that on your option. But a useful tool again for you to use. So I think that's schedule meeting channels, and I think that's probably covered everything that I need to cover without going into too much detail around live events. So I'll just go back to the slide deck for a second. Just there we go. So back into the Teams demo. So just to finish off then, so I hope that's given you a rattle through navigating your way around Teams and some of the key features. Just what we've done here is just summarize some of that. So in terms of what level do you need to be to do what within Teams, that's a summary slide there of what an owner looks like, what a member looks like, what guest users can do, what external users can do, and what anyone can do. And when I say anyone, that's just anybody, for example, joining a Teams meeting using a link. Talk about that in a little bit more detail. Again, this just summarizes the discussion we had and the demo we had around syncing files, and I will go back and show you what that looks like again in a bit more detail if we've got time at the end. But again, the point to take is those files are stored on SharePoint, whether you view them through Teams, whether you view them through SharePoint, or whether you view them through File Manager, they're the same. Not easy to demo what this looks like on a mobile, so just some screenshots that might be useful for you. So as I mentioned, we'd always recommend any of your Teams users, if you've got a mobile phone, is to install the app. The app pretty much gives you everything that you can do on a desktop, on an iPhone or an Android or an iPad device. So you can obviously work in your channels, post messages. You can join meetings with one click, which is great. So if you need to join a video call, again, the meeting that we're doing today, you can see that. Obviously it's smaller, but you can see everything you see today on the phone. One useful tip, if you've not seen it before, if you go to settings and then click this box here that says notifications, it has something called quiet hours. So you can actually configure quiet hours. So if you don't want to be disturbed outside of core working hours, that's a useful one to have switched on, to be honest, if you've not done that. So yes, put the app in, but also maybe manage your quiet hours to make sure you don't get pop-ups and messages out of hours during the night, for example. Inviting a guest user, so there are some screenshots of what a guest user experience looks like. So this is me inviting my personal user, my live.com user, to a team. So they'll get an email saying you've been invited to a team called Risc Teams Demo. Click here to open Teams. If you've not joined that organization before, you'll get a pop-up to say, please accept these T's and C's. This is what you're doing. And then once you've accepted that, you're in. So again, without laboring the point, you don't have to have, the user doesn't have to have Teams and doesn't even have to have the Teams app, so they can join as I've done here using the web browser. Always better to use the app if you can. So if you've got people that you work with regularly, just encourage them to install the app. It's free, and they don't have to have Teams. They can just use the app. An external invite to a meeting. So again, if you're inviting somebody from outside of your organization to a Teams meeting, they'll get an invite that looks a little bit like this. Oh, scary picture of me. And then they can join anonymously. Again, don't have to have a Teams account. They can just join as Mark, for example, here. And then once you've accepted that and click join now, you joined into the team through the web browser. And again, you get to experience the whole Teams meeting experience. In terms of devices, that's the other area that Microsoft have put a massive amount of effort into. I'm not going to cover telephony and video conferencing today, but again, the session that we're running tomorrow with WaveNet will cover that in a bit more detail. But in terms of how you can access Teams, whether it's the desktop, Windows desktop, whether it's a Mac, whether it's a web browser, then the experience is very similar. Obviously, the best experience you'll get from the Windows app, the full-blown app, but it's actually the web app and the mobile app is not far behind. Yeah, a couple of things, and again, I'm not going to go through this in detail. This is part of the slide pack that you can take away, but just something to be mindful of, particularly if you're working with consumers or small businesses that maybe don't have that don't use Teams. If they join through a web browser, there are some limitations in what they can do, particularly if you're on a Mac and using Safari, for example, then you won't get full audio and video two-way through Safari at the moment. So there are a couple of things they can do. So they can install Chrome, they can install the new Edge, for example, or they can install the app. Again, I'm not going to go into that too much detail on that, but if you try and join from a non-compatible browser, you'll get something like this, or something similar to this, that basically says it doesn't fully support Teams. Why don't you install the app? So it can be quite friendly. Likewise, if you've got people join in as guests from a mobile device, again, that's not a problem, other than the fact that the mobile web browsers don't support Teams fully. So again, that people will have to install the app. So again, if you're working with consumers, if you're financial advisors, for example, off the top of my head, then encourage them to install the Teams app if they've only got an iPad or a phone to join from. But again, the experience is the same. So that's just a wrap up. I mean, in terms of futures, there's, as I mentioned in the intro, Teams is evolving weekly, it seems, at the moment. So Microsoft do publish a full roadmap. Again, that we can give you those links as part of the pack. So some of the things that have come recently. So pop-out chat is fairly recent. So before that, you could only have one window to do everything. Now you can actually at least have multiple chat windows. Live captioning and subtitles. So subtitles is available now, but only in English. So you can actually switch those on at your end, and it will do its best to translate what I'm saying into text. There are plans to bring that in as a multilingual delivery, so you can effectively deliver a Teams meeting or a live event to in multiple languages, which is great. Dynamic mode, that's a very funky picture there. So that's again fairly new. If your Teams client, if you're using the Windows Teams client and it's been updated, then the video feed will change dynamically depending on how many people you've got in the meeting with video on. So Microsoft have upped the maximum number of simultaneous feeds to match Zoom's 49, I think actually to beat Zoom's. So you've got 7x7, as you can see on as it goes through there. You've got a maximum of 49 simultaneous feeds. And I mentioned live events. As I say, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. The other ones that they've recently bought, which should be available again if you've updated Teams, is something that's really geared for, or was developed for university students. So to give them the feel that they're in a lecture theatre. So that's what Microsoft call Together View, which is another option. You can actually switch to that in a Teams meeting. And as I mentioned, that large gallery view that you saw scrolling around there is now 7x7. So Microsoft have moved from 2x2, as in 4, using my maths, 3x3 to 9, and now 7x7 to 49 in the space of about 3 months. So 3 months ago, the video feed was just 2x2. So you can see how quickly they're rolling out some of these features, partly due to customer demand, partly due to obviously trying to be more competitive against people like Zoom and Cisco WebEx. Some other ones, just in terms of, this was a slide that we put up at the beginning of March that just showed what was coming down the line. Obviously, those that have crossed through have already been delivered. So there are still some, for example, the pop-out window only supports chats at the moment. You can't have multiple meeting windows. You can't have multiple call windows open yet. Again, that's coming. Active noise suppression is a great one that's still not been delivered, but was talked about 3 or 4 months ago, where effectively you don't have to worry about putting yourselves on mute. It will cut out any of the dog barking or babies crying or people drilling, as we had yesterday in the house. So lots of other things coming down the line. As I mentioned, there is a publicly available roadmap for Teams that you can look at, and it will tell you anything that they've committed to deliver and they've committed to deliver it in a time scale that's attached to it. Anything beyond that is just speculative, but so the roadmap's quite a useful one to look at. I didn't cover uploading documents into a chat, but in the same way that I posted a document into Teams and that uploads it to SharePoint, the chat uses OneDrive for Business. So if you upload a file into a chat conversation, then that file goes into your OneDrive for Business under something called Teams chat files, I think it's called. So it's not easy to share those files externally at the moment. You effectively have to go back to SharePoint, create a shared link, send it out. It's quite a convoluted process, and there are some changes coming down the line to make that a little bit more seamless for you. Offline support's the other big one as well at the moment. You can't do anything really, or anything at all actually, in Teams unless you're connected to the internet. So the ability to compose messages and have those sync up in the same way that you do with Outlook, that's again something else that's coming down the line. Finally, I think, or last but one, I mentioned some of the other events that we've been running, and I know some of you have been on some of the previous events. So these what we call boardroom briefings style events. So securing Microsoft Teams is one that we run in conjunction with Redstore, which is all about, as it says, securing Teams, backing Teams up, making sure it's recoverable, unifying communications with Microsoft Teams. Sean will post the registration link if he's not done that already in the chat. The next one of those is actually tomorrow, but we tend to run one of these a month, and we've also run some of the ones previously face to face, which we're also going to be running webinars on. So staying safe in our digital world is around endpoint protection with ESET, and then powering the modern workplace is all around the wider security threat, anti-malware, antivirus, and that kind of protection in conjunction with Protoss. So this, as I say, we've got two of those events that have already got dates to them. Sean will give you those sign up links. So hopefully, and again, I did my apologies at the beginning, but it's a really quick rattle through using the old 80-20 rule of trying to give you 80% of what you need to know in 20% of the time. So hopefully that was useful. So just thinking about questions, Sean, if I go back to previous question about syncing up the files, that'd be useful.
Yeah, like I said, I have dropped the Unifying Communications with Microsoft Teams link in the chat as well. So if anybody wants to sign up for that, that one's more surrounding the unified comms side of Microsoft Teams, if that's something you're interested in.
So I'll go through this bit again, try and slow it down a little bit. So as we can see, the Teams stores the files in SharePoint. As I mentioned, for every time you create a team, when you first create a team here, and again, it really depends what your permission is. As I mentioned, when you create a new team, I haven't done this in the demo. I haven't created a team from scratch because it can take 15 or 20 minutes for it to do everything it does in the background. So it will do things like create an Office 365 group. It will create a SharePoint site under sites for that team. It'll set permissions. It will go off and do quite a few things in the background. And again, I mentioned those three types of team there: private, which is normal, standard kind of team; public, that anybody can join, and then that organizational wide one that you're automatically added into. So under SharePoint, effectively for every team and then subsequently every channel, there's a separate directory under documents. But those files are accessible here within the team. Obviously, means you don't have to leave the app. You can edit those files here, or you can open them in the full-blown Word app if you've got it. And as I mentioned, if I open this in SharePoint, just to show you what it looks like again, it stores it under documents and then the name of the channel. So if you look at the URL at the top, if you can see that, let me just get rid of all that very long rubbish there. So the actual Teams sort of URL itself there is sharepoint.com/sites and then the name of the team. If you're in SharePoint view, it allows you to go up that level above, which you can't do in Teams. So again, if you go into documents, you can see every channel that's stored or accessible to you underneath that team called Teams End User Training, and you can actually sync it at that level. So rather than having to sync each individual directory or each individual channel rather, locally, you can actually just say, right, I want to sync the whole of that team, every channel, and then you can do it at that level by clicking the sync button here. And again, if I go back into the document view again, each of those directories is a separate channel containing files, and it comes under my Risc mail services, which let me expand that down so you can see it. And I've got a few there, and I've synced it at that top level there. So Teams end user training documents, every channel, including the one that I've created today, is synced locally. Obviously, if you know the OneDrive sync client, you don't have to physically download the documents too. So it's got a little cloud icon there, which basically means effectively they're placeholders. You can change that to say always keep on this device, and you'll see that changes. If you've seen this before, apologies for going through, and that's a tick in the box now. So actually those documents are now physically stored locally on the machine with a little tick next to them. But by default, OneDrive doesn't physically download them. It just effectively gives you placeholders with a little cloud next to it. So again, a lot of this is covered in the training scripts. The other bits that I just wanted to very quickly show you, the training script we use for our training and has formed the basis of what we've done today is actually based on Microsoft's own training. I mean, there's, as always with Microsoft, there's tons of documents and thousands of pages to look at, but actually if you want some quick refreshers on anything to do with Teams, if you've got the Teams app open and you go to the help button down here on the bottom left and click training, actually there's some really useful videos here. So as you see, there's a little overview there and there's different sections. So for example, creating and formatting posts, posting messages multiple channels, they're all there. Apologies to anybody that's American, but they are a bit cheesy, but they're actually very short and sharp. So you see most of them are less than a minute, and they work really well. Let me just try this one as a matter of course. There, you probably won't hear the audio for this. Okay, so it'll actually walk you through, for example, how to join a Teams meeting and then what you can do, how to share documents, and that, to be honest, is still the best training material that I've found across any of the stuff that Microsoft produced. There's obviously a lot more in-depth, detailed information, particularly for those of you that are IT admins or are looking at the organization as a whole and how you roll teams out around security, around data integrity, or around document storage. But as users, for end users, this is probably the best place to go. Talks you through live events. So again, if that's live events is something that you're interested in, if you're an organization that maybe delivers company updates to lots of shareholders, then live events is perfect for that. So it's not interactive, so people don't talk, but people can ask questions and you can moderate those questions through the Q&A window. So it's a different level of access. Like I say, you just need to be careful on the licensing for that. As I mentioned in the slides before, if you're interested in understanding more about how you can bring voice and contact center, and actually compliance-based call recording is the other thing that should be on that slide, actually. This opening slide here, when I talked about WaveNet. Compliance-based call recording is another big part of what they can provide through Teams. So again, if you're in a regulated industry, if, for example, you need every phone call, every meeting, every conversation, every chat recorded for 7 years, then we can do that as well. And that'll be covered on the Unifying Comms session. The Red Store, I mentioned the session with them around securing Microsoft Teams is really relevant for Office 365 as a whole. So, Office 365, Microsoft focus a lot of time and effort to make sure it's available. So to keep it up, multiple data centers, multiple copies of your documents, so you can't lose them. What they don't do is protect it. So if that document gets malware, for example, then it's not easy to roll that back and restore it. So what Red Store provide is that platform where effectively you can replicate your whole Office 365 environment externally and search that, pull that back down to a document or a chat conversation or an email from an external source. So yeah, so if any of those sessions would be useful for you, by all means sign up. The more the merrier. Which were those ones there? Ignore the dates. Actually, those are obviously previous ones at the bottom, but hopefully that was useful. Any other questions, Sean?
Nothing in the chat, but yeah, I don't know if you want to pause the recording and then we can
we'll do.
Kick off the Q&A.
Yeah, let's just share what together mode looks like while I'm in here. Oh, there's only two of us that got our video on, so there you go. Two of us together. So it works really well when you've got lots of people with video on. That's quite scary. I can see myself there. Yeah. So yeah. Apparently, as well as being geared for sort of students and feeling like you're part of a lecture theatre, it's meant to be better for you, the way your brain works, just processing conversations with multiple people. Apparently, they've done some work on it. Let me just stop the recording now.